Hey everybody, I hope your weekend is going well. Happy Mother's Day. I'm obviously not home. I'm with my mom. She's preparing for her last round of chemo, hopefully. So prayers up for her. Um, which is a nice segue into this. So we watched the into this episode of this miniseries, Dear Mama, until the end of time. Um, So it starts off by showing us Afeni Shakur. She's giving a speech at Clark Atlanta University in 2004. And that's where his mother is based and everything. And she begins by saying that a book, any book, is sacred. And she said that she worships the written word. And while I'm a practicing Christian, I make no bones about it. And I'm not a practicing Christian like the way most people think. You white evangelicals who are against gay people and abortions. No, like liberation theology my whole life. Okay. Um, I will say that was very much in line with the way I was raised. That you don't throw books on the floor, or you just don't throw them away, or just they're sacred objects with knowledge, and I respect it. Maybe that's part of the reason why I identify so much with Tupac in many ways, and I think a lot of people do in many different reasons. But just the way he was raised, it's important. Um, and I think that it's important to continue to teach people that, especially young kids, that. And I try to do that as a teacher, because for over 300 years, I mean, they were actively, be it in English, Spanish, or French, it doesn't matter where you were enslaved, trying to deny us access to books for the ability to read. And people only do that to you when they're afraid of what you'll learn and who you'll become for your own good, right? People don't keep you away from things like crack cocaine or methamphetamines or they don't keep you away from liquor stores. You see what I mean? Like they do that to destroy you. And books are very powerful. And the only reason why they're giving that kind of energy, and it's not just in Florida, they're just leading the way, but across this country, is because they're afraid of what black people will learn and what white people will have to deal with in terms of history. And that's why we still have a huge race problem in this country. And racism is illogical, right? Because if you really think black people are that stupid, you wouldn't waste your time trying to deny us books and education, would you? Hello and good morning. All right, so she then launches into um, that it's important to understand that the book that she's talking about is written on her, but it's by Jasmine Guy. It's not by her or whatever. And I think it's important to always give credit to the author. Um, and she did that out of respect. You know what I mean? Jasmine Guy says she wrote it because she loved Tupac, she loved his mother, and she understood that people don't get to where they are without certain influences and people in their lives. And the crowd went into an uproar at the university when she said Jasmine Guy, and I was like, yes, because the biggest part she ever played was on A Different World. And anybody who's been an HBCU student, shout out to HBCU people, are still hanging on everywhere in that show. Nobody has ever depicted that as well as Debbie Allen's director. Okay, she could do that because she knew Howard University. Whether Bill Cosby gave the platform his old rapist ass. Never mind, I can give a start. Anyway, so as Jasmine Guy is talking, and she's talking about the book, she said she really wanted to tell like the ugly truth. She was like, because just because you push through something and endure it or survive it doesn't mean you don't have trauma. And I thought that was such an important and profound statement because people always, make the statement, well, you got through it, so you're fine. You got through it, so you still here. You got through it, so push through. And that's not, no. Tupac pushed through a whole lot. Tupac clearly had traumas, that he was still working on dealing with. And he was young, he was a baby. But this whole idea that somehow if you've endured it, that then it shouldn't be that bad. It's like, I don't like the shaming mechanism when, these old school civil rights leaders or whatever, or just civil rights hustlers, should I say, people like Al Sharpton, like, oh, well, black people have been through worse. So that don't make this shit not bad. What the fuck? Anyway, so in the speech by Afeni, she said she would escape things. That was a habit of hers. She would just escape things if she didn't like them. She said, whereas Tupac was different. Tupac would confront them, um, especially when he didn't like them. And she said that was him. He was unwilling to get on bended knee. And I respect that so much. But there's a price you pay in this country. And I think anytime you go up against any sort of supremacist system that is meant to oppress you, and you refuse to capitulate or to assimilate. So Alan Hughes says that it's 2 weeks before Vegas, and he's describing, his experience. And Pac is nervous and scared of what Suge could do and what Suge wants. And cousin Pop stopped him right there in his tracks and was like, she was like, nah. Okay, Tupac was not scared. 2 weeks before Vegas, he was on the phone with Suge, foaming at the mouth, veins bulging, talking about how he was gonna burn Death Row down. She was like, he wanted his masters. He fulfilled his contractual obligation. He never meant to stay on death row, which helped their label. They made plenty of money off of him and was still making money off of him. And we know that Tupac was a writer, right? So he's writing all his stuff. He didn't owe that to anybody. And that helped him provide for his family while he was finishing up his prison term and when he was moving forward or whatever. So let me just say this. While we on it, Suge, you a punk motherfucker. And you was way overdue by the time they locked you up a few years ago. You had too many chances, okay? By the time you went to prison, your black ass should have been locked up, okay? But anyway, I'm back on script. All right, so Tupac never intended to be a death row that long. And then they started playing To Live and Die in L.A. Now, anybody who's watched my videos for any significant amount of time, and my short time on YouTube knows I absolutely hate Los Angeles. I went to graduate school in UCLA. I fucking hate it. I hate it. I hate it. But To Live and Die in LA is still a motherfucking bop. That's how you know Tupac shit is just hot. Okay? So, Tupac asked his Aunt Glo to move from Decatur, Georgia to LA. And she was like, all the way from Decatur, Georgia. Now, for those of you who don't know much about Decatur, Decatur is basically East Atlanta, and to go to LA. And she said she said that he told her bring every gun they had. He said he didn't want to eat anybody else's fried chicken. And she said, I was like, hell yeah. She said he was out hope for a better life. Like, I mean, essentially they trusted him and trusted that he would take care of them. So him, I mean, you gotta give it to his Aunt Glo that she's still holding it together. That's a lot to hold. That's a lot. But him, his cousin, moving back to Vegas. Him, his cousin Kidada check into the Luxor Hotel in Vegas for the Tyson fight. That's where we stopped where Snoop was talking about how Suge was threatening to kill, all that shit. Anyway, so she said he didn't want her and Kidada out, like, even at the fight. Like, and he was like, no, it's Robert Ween out there. Y'all don't want to be out here like that. And I was like, well, Pac, I know you want that. But she was like, we was pissed off because we was like, why are we here and we can't go out? And facts, okay, agreed. And then you kind of wonder if a piece of you just has a premonition that something may go bad. Like, not spare your life bad. I don't know. And because Tupac was so in tune. So his cousin said he had planned to wear his gold Machiavelli necklace, his regular jewelry that night. And he was talking to Suge, and Suge was like, nah, man, you don't need all that. And he said Tupac was walking behind him, and he said, Suge kept asking, Pac, are you behind me? And he was like, yeah, motherfucker, like, I'm behind you. Like, why you keep asking me that? And just something about that, and there's just too many loose ends with Tupac's story. And one thing I've always learned, whenever there's too many stories, it's an inside job. And by inside job, I mean within the country, there's something not right. So that already let me know there was some setup shit. You know what I'm saying? Are you behind me? Are you behind me? Tupac's a grown man. Like, yo, what the fuck? And it was given real COINTELPRO informant, real Mike O'Neill, and Fred Hampton. Okay, that's what it was given. I'm not saying it's true, but that's what it was given. Okay? Then we find out Aunt Glo, who left Decatur, Georgia, is actually driving through Texas. And let me tell you something. I know that shit probably on the map don't look that far, but let me tell you something. that's a good 16, 17 hours. Okay. I know, because I drove from Atlanta to LA to New York. Okay. Trust me. And she said that's when she finds out that Pac, she hears on the radio essentially that he was shot. Right? She didn't hear that he was killed, but she had heard that he was shot. Um, and she's coming out there to live with Tupac, and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, that's, and then you got to finish that drive? The fuck? Especially, hell, if you brought guns, it ain't like you can just have your car, you know what I mean? So then we get Mike Tyson, who actually talks a lot in this documentary. And, okay, I'm going to stay off Mike Tyson for the moment. So he started sweating heavy even talking about that fight from that night. And they give the background on Mike Tyson's upbringing, which we've heard before. And he said the difference between him and Tupac. He said, Tupac was like a little brother and he looked up to me. He said, and Mike Tyson did preface it though by saying, I don't feel good about what I'm about to say. And he said, honestly, I thrived in places like prison. He said, I was a dark person. He said that Tupac was like a good kid. Tupac didn't like prison. I was like, yeah. He was like, but the difference is, he said, I would fight in a ring and I would get off on that. But Tupac fought for causes. He fought for what he believed in. He wasn't just fighting for jewelry and stuff and just to make money. Like, he believed in what he said. And Mike Tyson was like, I was fine as long as I had nice jewelry, nice clothes, and I was able to get high. So, long story short, Mike Tyson knocked this other guy out in less than a minute. He said he walked out the ring, and like one of the first people he hugged was Pac, and Pac is like going off and crazy and like, yeah, you got his ass. They said the fight was essentially too quick. And they said too quick, not in a sports sense, but Pac as a spectator, the way his energy operated. And, Jamal, who was his godfather from the Black Panther Party, was like, that just wasn't enough for his gladiator spirit. And I'm like, he's 25. Your brain has its last growth spurt at like 29. I mean, like, when you think about how young he was, and it just, the amount of attention on him, for better or for worse. Anyway, so I can only imagine being that charged up at 25. And I could honestly see myself being like that. So they said if Pac didn't have somebody to fight, he would find somebody to fight. Now, I'm going to keep it real. I know plenty of people like that. And I know that's not healthy and people need to stop. But, like, that's not... I wish that sounded more strange to me than it actually did. So he was basically talking about how he's going to knock ninjas out just like that when they fuck over him, this, that, and the other. Now, I'm sure Suge's big ass was kind of listening, since he done cursed your ass out and told you he wanted his masters and all this shit, and you thinking to yourself, maybe he talking about me, him and his people. Shit, he probably was. Anyway, because you are trying to fuck over him. But apparently there was some guy named Orlando Anderson who was part of the Crips, and that gang shit was heavy in LA. Remember I have to say now, I'm getting old. So remember they used to do the drive-by shootings, like, people would just drive by and just murk somebody. Like that shit was like nationwide. That shit was serious there. I mean, gangs are serious in a lot of places like Chicago, but that kind of shit. Anyway, so he was part of the Crips, but he had stolen somebody on Death Row's medallion the other day. And Tupac spots him at the fight, and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna jump on him." So next thing you know, they get into the fight or whatever. And I don't think I had ever really watched that tape so seriously, because I was like, well, ninjas getting fights all the time. But Aunt Glo said every time she looks at that video, she cringes, because this is the night he was shot and essentially, would die. She said, because I almost feel like it's not real. She said, Tupac wasn't a gang member. How did you get here? What were you trying to prove? She was like, he just got caught up. And that's been, a kind of a theme throughout this whole documentary of him wanting to identify with the streets in a way. But, like, yeah, plenty of people on the streets loved him. You know what I mean? But those heavy elements, it's not worth it. He didn't have to, but he's young. He's young. And I just feel like that's something we have to keep in perspective. So the cousin, whose name I missed, so I apologize for calling her a cousin, started talking about the call where they heard Tupac was shot. And he was shot 4 times. She said, now before they get that, she said, I remember him coming back at the hotel. Comes back into the hotel room and was like, yeah, I just knocked this ninja out, so on and so forth. She said he changes from that silk, like yellow, orange shirt, whatever color it was, and he puts on like a regular jersey, like ready to go to party. But he still told his cousin and Kidada to stay in the room. And she said, and they're pissed, like, what's going on? What the fuck do you mean we can't leave? But they listened. And she was like, West Coast people took that gang shit too far. She said that wasn't New York shit, and that's what I mean. Like, it was a different element of like gang life. Jamal was like, the worst thing you can do on the street. Jamal from the Black Panther Party. You could do on the street is to slap somebody, or like that. He said because that's humiliating. It's debasing, and I'm like, yeah, that's why men do it to women. But especially to do it to another man. And he said that Orlando had enough Crips in the building and in that area to see Tupac humiliate him like that. Had enough influence within that gang to see him, find him, and kill him. And I think to some degree, yes, that's a part of it. I do not think in the same way that, well, not in the same way, but in a similar vein as people blaming the Nation of Islam. Yes, they were harassing Malcolm X. Yes, they were trying to blow up his house. Yes, they were trying to hurt him for leaving what is essentially a cult, and him being their biggest name and their biggest leader. But they didn't do it on their own. You know what I mean? They didn't do it on their own. And Malcolm X, always said, well, I know what they can't do because I trained them on how to do what they do. They're working with somebody else. So that just, the Crips alone is not enough for me. But nevertheless, so they go on with his former manager who said that the picture of him in the car with Suge always breaks her heart. She said, and I wonder, did he know, like, are they about to kill me? And when you look at the picture, he looks like a deer in the headlights, and he looks so innocent. And he just looks like just a youngin who did something, and probably the next day, honestly, would have felt like bad. Just like he said he felt bad after the Hughes brother incident. Like, of course he felt bad. He has a conscience, and he's still growing up. But sometimes those decisions can be deadly. And they were supposed to be heading out to the 662 Club for fun. And the cousin said that she was hoping when they got, because it's going back and forth, and when they were talking about him getting shot 4 times, she was hoping that when they got to the hospital, it was going to be like New York, when he got shot 5 times. And he was walking around the room, and he was coherent, even though he had been shot, because he was ready to get out of the hospital and all that kind of shit. And she was like, I'm fucked up, Kidada's fucked up. She said, and at that point, I was the next of kin, because Afeni hadn't made it to the hospital yet. Aunt Glo hadn't made it to the hospital yet. And him and Kidada weren't married. So she said she was scared. She said, because it wasn't like it was in New York. So when I got in there, they had all these tubes of his nose. He was not able to move or anything like that. And she said it was scary seeing him like that. And he was in a coma. She said she already knew it was basically a whole lot more difficult than whatever he was facing before. Because if somebody's coherent, you can have a different kind of hope. And then Aunt Glo was like, the first thing she thought was when she saw him and she showed up at the hospital. And I'm thinking to myself, damn, she had to be tired as fuck. Was when she had to give the consent to take her mother, who was his grandmother, off life support. And she said, but I had a ton of people in my ear saying, well, he's okay. This has happened before, this, that, and the other. And she said, but something in her spirit, it just reminded her of that. And she was like, here we go again. And I just think the trauma of losing people, the trauma of poverty, of not having, and then to constantly lose things and then lose people has to take a toll. And that's why I say for her to even be sitting up here telling this story, that takes a lot of courage. And Aunt Glo looks good. Aunt Glo was in her 70s. Aunt Glo looks good. And considering this story, they done been through a whole hell of a lot. So, Snoop, here we go. And somebody got in my comments last week was talking about how Snoop ain't shit, he was a liar and jealous. And I was like, there's some stuff that was new to me. And I do think there is a beauty in getting older. But, I just want whoever that was to know. Message received. Processing. I appreciate that. So Snoop said he showed up at the hospital. And he was like, and I felt bad because, we weren't right. We had that fight or whatever on a plane, and he said he didn't really know what was happening. He just knew he was in a coma. He said Feeny pulled him to the side and gave him some encouraging words and told him not to go in there looking like no puppy dog. She said he's not used to seeing you like that. That's not going to do him any good. Um, and I was thinking to myself, gosh, his mother was able to garner up the strength to tell him that. His mother was strong. Like, I don't know if I could have even talked to anybody to make them feel better. And my son is laying there in a coma. And she is gatekeeping to ensure that whoever goes in there to see him is not going to have him feeling sorry for himself, so on and so forth. So they said his heart finally stopped. They tried to resuscitate him 5 times. The mom says she thought it was important, even as they showed the interview, the tears in her eyes. I know it had to be hard. Like, I started getting tears. You can hear my voice. She said, I thought it was important to release his spirit. And I just thought that was such a beautiful way to articulate it. She said, I rejoiced then. And she said, I do now when I'm not crying. And that was hard to watch. Because I know it was hard to live after that. Because one, you've lost your son. And to her great credit, for her ability to be able to say, I'm not the only woman who has lost a son to gun violence, and still be able to have this communal sort of ability to articulate and to love people enough to empathize with them despite what she was going through, that is only the power of God working in your life, period. Because not just anybody can do that. And I know it had to be hard to live through that, because that was what Aunt Glo was talking about. Like, it went from Tupac is dead to, now all these people want to know about him. They want to hear from the family, this, that, and the other. She's his mother. She is, the mouthpiece for the family. And when you think about, the world couldn't let him go. The world still hasn't let him go. But I remember even being in elementary school, and I was like, yeah, Tupac died. I was like in 3rd grade. And like, the other 3rd graders was like, no, he faked his death. He's in paradise. They're like, Ninja, paradise is heaven. Like, but they were like, no, he faked his death. Like, he faked out the government or whatever. I was like, okay. And you know what I mean? Like, but when the world still has these conspiracy theories, so on and so forth, because they just can't accept that he's gone. I can only imagine how the mother and the family did. So once he was pronounced dead, Aunt Glo said I was able to go and see him. She said the machines were off at that point. She said, and I just kissed her from head to toe. And she said, I just told him to fly. And that is, I think, just a difficult part about death. Because as Christians, I know we believe that, yeah, this life is short, but you'll have life eternal on the other side. But when you lose people, you have that promise, but you won't even know whether that promise is real until you die. And that pain of losing a loved one is hard. It's hard. And the news media, as soon as he was pronounced dead, the news media had caught on to the fact that the coroner's truck showed up. And that's how they knew he was dead. And Glo was like a fiend. Was like, we're not crying here. We're not grieving here. We're not making any announcements to the media. I mean, like, his mother was still keeping the family together. And that takes a lot. So Glo was like, now the mother had to go out in front of the world as she's grieving and speak to everyone later. And she said over and over again, she's not the only black woman, not the only woman who's lost a son to gun violence, and just basically rededicated her life to trying to keep things like this from happening. And then they show Eminem, and I was like, why the fuck do we care about Eminem and what he was doing at the time? I don't give a shit. He appropriated black culture all through the 2000s. And that was back when a whole lot of other black people was really good with that shit. Okay, till Trayvon Martin shit kind of woke y'all's ass up. And I don't even think that Tupac would have liked him, and that's just my opinion. And that's one of the things I was talking about last week, that Death Row wouldn't even have its legacy had it not been for Tupac. People like Eminem wouldn't even wanted to work with those people had Tupac not worked with them. They still making money off his legacy. That's what I mean when I say that. So then they brought up Biggie's death. So Snoop was just repeating what Pac had been teaching them all along. I'm glad you learned something. That the government broke up the Black Panther Party. Then it became when you broke up like those community groups like the Black Panthers, they became the Bloods and the Crips, and they taught us to hurt each other and break each other down and this, that, and the other. And I was like, yeah, we saw that in real time with this, with Tupac's life. We actually are seeing an element of that. So Afeni didn't have time to really grieve him more. And I always wonder, I always feel for people who have to do that in the public eye. People who I feel like are genuine and have to do that in the public eye. The cousin said, actually, after he died, it became work. Because now we have to, like, you got to plan a funeral. You got to have the right venue. You got to keep the media out of stuff. You got to manage this. You got to manage that. She was like, and that was hard. And everybody's hurting. So she found out shortly after his death, Afeni did, that Tupac didn't even own a house they were staying in. Or the stuff that she thought he owned that they didn't. They were staying there. Now, he may have had the ability, but I was like, okay, here we go. She about to take him to court. And that's what I thought Glow was about to say. I thought Glow was about to say, and she immediately went and got a lawyer and this, that, and the other. And she was like, no, she went and packed her shit, told us to pack our stuff and said, we got to go. Like, I'm not fighting over nothing that's not ours. Leave it alone. We're going to take what we have and we're going to go somewhere else. And she went and bought a houseboat. And Glow said she needed to get herself together with her own place. And I think that was better than anything. She wasn't trying to have the biggest house on the block. She just needed to be able to get herself together in peace without having to worry about what belonged to somebody else, what didn't belong to her, not up in court. And where she bought the houseboat, they were interviewing her. She said across from there was where Otis Redding wrote, sitting on the dock of the bay. She said, but I like to believe he did it here where I'm standing or whatever. And Afeni talked about how she went into therapy after Tupac's death. She said, that was a huge step for me. And that's a huge step for a lot of people, because we talk about mental health and people say therapy, this, that, and the other. And I admit, I'm somebody who goes to therapy every single week. And I don't know when I'll be able to stop, because I still have a lot of stuff I have to unpack and deal with. I own it. I deal with it. But even as people talk about mental health, oh, you need to go seek therapy, that costs money. It costs. Therapy costs. It's not just that easy. And on top of that, even people that give advice a lot of times are talking about, oh, well, you just need to be in therapy. You need to go do that. You need to go that. Like, even those people aren't ones in therapy who also need it too. So, like, it's, when I say it's a big step, I don't care how much money you have or don't have. It only works if you are willing to acknowledge that there are some things that are really wrong with me, that were wrong with my life. I don't know where to begin, but I need help. And then be committed to it. Because it's easy to walk away from it. Anyway, so then we get the guy from Digital Underground, and he said he was so spoiled about Pop. He said that I quit music after his death. He said I miss him so much. He said because, like, I didn't know why I was doing it anymore. And those were the people that put him on, So he said there was a relief, though, with his death. And he said because, he fought and he died to get his message across. And when he died, it became even bigger. He released more albums after his death than he did, during his death. And he said the thing was he was tortured. And I was like, yeah, he's an empath. And I'm a very empathetic person. So I feel what other people feel, or try to put myself constantly in their position. And that's not always the best thing, but it is what it is. And he was like, he cared about Black people and what was happening to them and with his death. And he said, and finally with the death, all the voices in his head were silenced. The things that tortured him. And Tupac already had music and videos prepared for his death. Like a lot of those things, and that's why I wonder if he had premonitions when he told Kidada and his cousin to stay. But what you should have done was just let them in LA. You shouldn't have brought them just so they could be there to have your baby. I'm just playing, but not kind of serious. Anyway, so he talked about how death, they showed Tupac talking about how death is a way of escaping pain on earth. And he was like, people are always crying when that person dies. He was like, no, you shouldn't cry. You should be happy. The reason why they die is because they get to escape all this shit that's down here. And his mother said he understood early death and living. She said, and that's rare for a young person to have that perspective. And I was like, yeah, because Tupac was special. So to quote Snoop, Tupac was just like a special motherfucker. He is so articulate. Anyway, so Snoop said one of the things that made him stand out was when him and his now wife, he said we got into an argument. He was like, this was on a plane again. And the rappers on Death Row was like, fuck that bitch. You can have any bitch you want. So he said, and Pac said, no, fuck them. That girl loves you. You need to make her your wife. Snoop, I get the point of your story because I can believe Pac didn't give a shit about what nobody else thought and stood up for what was right and said what he needed to say because that's the kind of man he was. But I'm side eyeing you and any man like you that lets another man, I don't give a fuck how bad their argument was, refer to his girlfriend as a bitch and attack her because they got into an argument. Okay? And the fact that Pac thought more and respected her more in a way where he pulls you aside, and yes, you did end up marrying her, says to me, you had a whole fucking lot you needed to learn. And you told that story, and I just, there was another way to deliver that. Anyway, so Afeni sued Death Row so she could own Tupac's masters. Yeah, Tupac wrote his shit. And seeing that he wasn't on good terms with them when he died because he wanted his shit, yeah, Afeni held that down. And what belonged to him was his body of work. She's the one who encouraged him to keep writing when he went to prison and wanted to kill himself before he went. And I'm glad she kept fighting for it. But that takes a lot. It takes a lot of gumption. And Snoop was like, they were saying like, oh, she's difficult. She's hard to work with. He was like, no, she's a smart black woman who knew her son's stuff needed to be in her possession. And I was like, facts. So his mother is a motherfucking warrior. Bottom fucking line. Pac was a warrior who learned what he did and lived the way he did because of the spirit of his black mother. Now, she may not have been perfect raising him, and I know she carried a whole lot of guilt, but nobody is perfect in raising them. All you can do is the best you know how to fucking do, okay? And she did her fucking best. All right, so Glow had 6 kids. I remember her saying that because that kind of stunned me. She said she only had 1 nephew and only had 1 sister. And she was like, but I hit the jackpot. And I was like, God damn. I said, 7 girls, 1 boy, and you got Tupac as your nephew? Yeah, girl, you did hit the jackpot, but I'm glad you appreciated that during his life. And she said, and I live to tell the story. And she said, and don't get it twisted. And I think that's important with this documentary. Because, you know, some people are like, oh, yeah, he felt Hughes brothers, they shouldn't be doing it, this, that, and the other. He was 25. That shit was like fucking 30 years ago. Some dumbass, 10-minute fight that had them beefing. And she was like, don't get it twisted. Afeni wanted the story told. And I believe that. That's why she was writing. That's why she was always encouraging Tupac to write. Because once you write it down, it's hard. People can blow up things, this and the other, but it leaves a trace of something. And somebody who was as learned as she was understood that, oral histories are important, right? And we live in a Western society where people value what's written over what's oral. And because we do, and because that was the way that they kind of drowned out our histories by trying to cut us off from spreading it, so on and so forth. Both of those things are important, but the written word has a power. And I believe that she wanted this story to be told. And his mother had a huge farm and still kept that houseboat out in California. And then his cousin said, Afeni had a heart attack May 2nd, 2016. And the man said, well, did she reach peace of mind? And Glow was like, hell no. She never had peace of mind. And I was thinking to myself, of course, she never fucking had peace of mind. She had a fucking heart attack. Not to mention she had been in the Black Panthers. She was fighting for unlawful evictions. She is training a son and a daughter for war, to be empathetic to their community, to work hard. Anybody who cares that much about the other things of the world can never be at peace of mind in a world where the society and the government is always doing the exact opposite of that shit. Of course, you didn't have peace of mind. And we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Sweet honey in the rock. Okay? So, that's a dumbass question to ask. But anyway, and that heart attack is indicative of stress. Hell, I'm surprised that was her first one. I'm not gonna lie. And God rest her soul, though. Because we know she's at peace now. And it ends with Afeni Shakur. They talk about how she had a small ceremony where they threw Tupac's ashes in Malibu, all his books, all the stuff that belonged to him, to give it back to him, essentially, and back to the earth. And then it ends with Afeni Shakur reading excerpts from Jasmine Guy's book on her life. And I said, this last part of the documentary, I swear they was trying to do everything in their power to make us cry for the rest of the week. Okay? Because I'm trying to get through this and talking so sorry. But anyway, this has been fun. Thank y'all for watching. Anything else y'all think I might be interested, put it in the comments. And yeah, it was good rocking with y'all these past few weeks. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.